Have you ever wanted to create these awesome background effects in Photoshop and put your own image on top of them using colors from the image? Or how about we take an image like this and we get these incredible see-through backgrounds? Or you could just take a standard picture. This is Ali, my wife, and my cat, and the background's very distracting, so I've just put it into an awesome background like that for an Instagram post. Hi, my name's Tim Wilson, and I'm going to take you through how to do this incredible background step by step in easy bite-sized portions. Let's open up Photoshop and get started. Let's go and open up the picture that we want to use. Now I'm going to open up this image from Adobe Stock. I've provided the picture for you if you want to try it yourself using this one. And I want to select the woman. Now the easiest way for me to do that is to either click on Select Subject down there or go along to this little Object Selection tool. Photoshop's got some really cool AI tools now. And the great thing about this is it says select people at the top, and it's just recognized that person. Now you'll find if you've got a whole group of people, you'll have a number of people appearing along here, and you can choose which one you want to select. I'm going to click on her because she's the one I want to select, and you can see it says entire person. That's what I want to select there. Or if you just wanted to select part of the person, you can actually go along and just select these bits in here. Anyway, I'm going to click on Apply, and that makes my selection. Now, if you have used things like layer masks in the past, you can go in and you can just apply a layer mask to this. If you haven't used layer masks, then you can use copy and paste. I can go up to Edit and Copy, or you can use the shortcuts if you know them, Edit and Paste. And in my layers panel, I'll just pull out my layers over here. If you can't find your layers, it's the window menu halfway down to find your layers. And I'm going to pull that down so you can see my layers in there. I've got this background. I don't need the background anymore, so I'm going to bin it, and that leaves my cutout in here. I want to do one more thing before I stop for you to try this out. I'm going to go along and I want to make this a square image. So the easiest way to do that, and there's a number of ways, but the easiest way is to go to this little cropping tool over here, go to your ratio at the top and choose 1:1 in there. And that will allow you to just click and drag a rectangle. When you first do this, it just makes the rectangle, it won't allow you to make it bigger than the size of your document. But once you've released it, you can then go and grab the corners and pull it out. By the way, I'm going to use Command and minus if I'm on a Mac, or Control and minus if I'm on a PC to zoom out a bit. And I'm just going to make this bigger, like so. I think that's the size I want the whole document to be. And then I'm going to click on the tick, and there we go. We've got her nice and small in the middle of this square document. Try it out. What we're going to do now is we're going to create that colored trail. And we're going to use a little tool over here called the single column marquee tool. And all it does is when you move over your image and you click, it selects one row of pixels. So I'm just going to click down and move it so it's roughly down the middle of my picture. And then we're going to do that copy and paste again. So edit and copy, and edit and paste. Now, I know you can't see it, but what it's done is it's copied all of those pixels over there into a single row. If I were to zoom right in, and let's go in a little bit further over here, and I hide the background, you can see we've got all those colored pixels just like that in one single row. So on this layer, I've clicked on this layer here. I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and scale. And you can see how it gives me this sort of little line with some other bits in there. If you click and you scale out like this, just by dragging it out, what will happen is it'll scale both the width and the height. We don't want that. I'm just going to undo that over there. So the trick here is to go to one of these middle little dots, hold down the Shift key, and then drag it out over there. Drag this one over here. I'm making this, as you can see, a lot bigger than my page. Let's keep going out with that. Over there. I'm happy with that. And all I'm going to do now is to click on the tick, and you can see it's brought in the colors in there. So I've got my colors, and lastly, before we start to manipulate them, I'm going to go over to the layer menu, and I'm going to go down to Smart Objects, and we're going to convert this to a smart object. I'll explain why we do this later on, but it really will make your life a lot easier. So it's just Layer, Smart Object, Convert to Smart Object, and it'll convert the layer that you're on into a smart object. Still looks exactly the same, but it's just now a smart object. Have a bit of a go with that one. We're now going to adjust the shape of this to get a nice twist in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go along to the Edit menu. I'm going to go to Transform, and I'm going to say Warp. And the warp puts this little grid over the top. Now the great thing about this grid is I can then grab these corners and I can just pull them around. You can see how I can pull that one over that. This is the trick to doing this. I can pull this one up like that. So we can just move them around and get some really interesting shapes going on. So to get the effect that I was doing there, I was just pulling one over the top of the other one. Over there. We have some little handles, so you can play with the handles. You can pull the handles around to get different effects on there. Now, once you've got something that you like, we can just click on the tick there to OK it. And then I can move my person on top of that layer there. Of course, once you've done that, and I do this all the time, I look at it and think, you know what, that wasn't quite right. I want to manipulate it a bit more. This is why we've done it as a smart object, because if I click on that layer again, I can go back to Edit, Transform, and use Warp again. And you can see it's picked up where we left off. So I can then just continue manipulating this around and seeing what I can do with these shapes in here. It really is just a matter of playing until you get the shape that you like. Now, I'm thinking I'm kind of quite happy with that. I think I'll just pull that up a little bit like so and click on the tick again. But at any time, you can go back and manipulate the shape. Have a go with that. Let's put an interesting background in this. I'm going to go and choose some colors that I want to use for my background. So I will go over to the left-hand side to the foreground of the background color. I'm going to click on the foreground, and then I'm going to sample a color from my document. So I'm going to sample this, which is basically her skin tone over there. And then I'm going to click on the background, the back one over there, and the moment that this color picker opens, it allows you to sample colors, and I'll sample more of a pinky color in there. So I've got those two colors, sort of a lighter pink and a more orangey pink. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down in my layers to the very bottom to this little black and white circle. This is the adjustment layer icon. Click on that, and I'm going to use a gradient. I'll click gradient in there. Now you can see the gradient that we have goes from the pink, the foreground color, into transparent. If you click on the little drop down in the gradient window, you'll find that in the basics, if you click on that drop down so you can see in the basics, the first gradient there will be from your foreground to your background color. Now, maybe I don't like the linear gradient, I want to use a radial gradient. You can reverse it, so you can go from one color to the other or the other way around. You can scale it. If it's too big or too small, you can scale those colors out. So I think I'm happy with that. I'll click OK. All I have to do now is to drag this underneath that layer over there. So really easy, really simple to do. You can actually adjust your gradient still, because I'm thinking that I really could do with a darker pink at the top. I like the pink that's behind her. So if I double click on the gradient and then click the gradient itself, not the drop down, but the gradient itself, you can see I can choose either to work on the pink or the orangey pink. I'm going to click on the orangey pink. Here's the color there. You'll see if I choose that one, it's the lighter color. Click on that color there, click that, and then I can go in and maybe sample a different color from there. I like that. I'll go back to this pink over here and adjust that. So I'll click on there. Maybe I'll try a lighter pink still. You can just work your way around, or you can sample colors directly in here and see what you get. That's actually looking quite good now. I'm happy with that, and I'll click OK and OK again. I would save this by doing a file and save as. So I've got the large file with all the layers, and then if I want to export this for social media, I'll say export as. I'll put in the width and height that I want to export it to. Now, because this is going to go for Instagram, let's say, and Instagram is 1080 by 1080 pixels, I can just type in 1080 in there, and you can see it sorts out my height for me as well. I'm doing this as a JPEG, high quality, and export that and just save it wherever I want that to go. So I'll just save this out on my desktop, and that's done. I'd like to move her over, so I'm going to use the move tool, and I'm going to grab and move her across. Make sure I've selected her first. Move her across to here, something like that. And maybe I want her to look like she's almost got her foot behind this shape. So I'm going to go to her layer. Now, if you've got a layer mask on here, then what you can do is you can just paint on your layer mask to hide that area. If, like mine, you've done it destructively, you're going to have to erase that out, or once again layer mask if you understand how layer masks work. Now, by the way, if you don't understand how layer masks work, I do have a full course which takes you through the beginnings of Photoshop all the way through to the advanced sections. So do have a look for that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a selection and then just delete that part of her shoe out. I'm going to zoom in, so Command and plus to zoom in, and let's just move up a little bit like that. Now, I'm actually going to click on this layer here and just hide that for the moment. And I'm going to use a little tool over here. I'm going to be using the magnetic lasso tool, because the magnetic lasso tool will allow me to just click over there, and then it'll kind of follow that edge for me really easily. I don't have to be too accurate about this. If I'm kind of, waggling around like that and moving it, it's not such a problem. I'll keep going all the way around. Now, this is kind of where her shoe is. Whoops, doesn't matter about that bit. Back to the beginning again. By the way, if it goes totally wild, just press escape to get out of that tool. And we'll just show her layer over there. So you can see that this is the bit that I want to remove. And because I've just selected it, I will click on her layer. I'm going to use an erase tool. So this is a destructive way of working. I'm going to take my brush size down a bit and just erase out that little bit over there. Because this is a destructive way of working, I can't move her around anymore because I have lost that bit of her foot. So if you can possibly do this using a layer mask, it's the best way to work. Now, what we also want to do is to give this a little bit more depth, shall we say, by lightening some areas and darkening some areas down. I'm going to hide her for now. I think I'd like to darken this area here. So as it bends over, it looks like it's dark underneath, and maybe lighten this area a little bit as well. I'm going to do that with a new layer. So let me start off by going over here and using the magnetic lasso tool. And I'm just going to once again lasso this bit over here. So I'll start from the bottom and just go up along that line there and follow the line all the way up here and around and back down to there. So this is the bit that I want to darken down. Now, if you are au fait with the masks and adjustment layers, you could just add an adjustment layer into that to darken it down and then slowly paint out that area so that you could darken it this way. I'm going to actually do this in a destructive way on a new layer over there. I'm going to take a paintbrush and I'm going to use, I think, a very dark version of a color that's there already. So I'm going to sample this brown here, but make it really dark and then paint it in on that. So I'll just paint that bit in over there. Now you can see my brush is kind of quite hard. If I make the brush bigger, I'll get a much softer edge. I think something like that. Now, if your brush, when you paint it, has gone over the edge here, this is obviously going to be on top of that layer there. We can deselect this, by the way. We can just choose deselect over there. If you go onto this layer, and as long as it's on top of that shape layer, you can then go to the layer menu and you can say create a clipping mask. So it'll just clip it to that layer there, and you won't see that effect on anything else. Now with this layer here, I would suggest changing it to multiply, and you can adjust it if you've gone too dark by just adjusting the little slider over there. Let's try that again. So I want some sort of darker area over here. So I can use one of my selection tools. I'll go back to this layer here. Let's just hide everything else. That's the area that I want to darken down. And same again, I will use my brush, but this time I'm actually going to sample the red, use a dark version of the red on a new layer again. So we'll add a new layer here. I'll just paint slightly smaller brush on that. I'm going to deselect that. So select, deselect. I've got a bit of a mistake there. So I will actually use my erase tool with a soft brush. Let's make that brush a bit bigger. I can sort of soften out some of that to get rid of it. And same as before, we go in here, we change this into multiply, and you just adjust your opacity slightly to get some darkening. So we're getting some sort of shapes coming through now. What about lightening up? Well, it's exactly the same thing, but in reverse. I'm going to add another layer here. I'm going to take my paintbrush. I'm going to sample, let's see, let's sample the that very light area there. And I'm just going to paint down on there to lighten this area up. Now, do something like that, maybe like that, over there. And in fact, I'm going to just lighten this bit over here and that bit up there. Now, you can see it really is over the top. But I can change from normal mode. And if we go down, we've got things like screen and lighten, or overlay or soft light. I like soft light. That looks really good in there. By the way, you just experiment with these and see which one works for you. But for me, soft light works really well. and I can maybe just adjust the opacity on that. So let's have a look before and after. I think that's lightened up, and we've got a really nice three-dimensional feel to this. Let's bring our person back in again like that. Have a bit of a go just making layers, painting on them, changing the ones that you want to darken down using multiply, and the ones you want to lighten up, I'd suggest something like soft light in there. So the lightened ones, I used a light color on the brush. The darker ones, I used a darker color. If you've gone too far, just go and get your erase tool. Nothing set in stone in here, and you can just go and erase the bits out from that particular layer that you don't want in there. Have a go, try it out, have some fun, and get some three dimension to your shape. My lady over here looks like she's actually floating in space. I want to put a shadow underneath her. I'm going to go to her layer, and I'm going to put in an effect layer over there. So I'm going to go down to the effects, and the one I want is the drop shadow. So I'll put in a bit of a drop shadow, get my opacity up a little bit, and I think the size, maybe make it a little bit bigger. So I just want that sort of glowy shadow behind her, and click OK. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're looking at that and thinking, that is the most rubbish shadow I've ever seen in my life. You're absolutely right. It is. It's awful. However, if I now go to the layer menu, because that's a drop shadow which is applied to the layer, I'm going to go to Layer Styles, and I'm going to say create a new layer from that drop shadow. You see, I say create layer. Look at that. I've now got a new layer, which is the shadow by itself. Now I can manipulate it. So I'm going to go to Image, Edit, Transform, and I'm going to use Distort. And I'm just going to pull this down. Oh, wrong one. Let me make sure I'm on the right layer first. So Edit, Transform, Distort. I'm going to pull this down. There you can see we've got a much better looking shadow now. Pull this out so it's sort of underneath her shoe somewhere like that. Now the lighting is coming from here. You can see her face is lit and the shadow's on the other side. So the shadow should sort of go this way a little bit as well. I'll click the little tick to OK it. Now I don't want it to go on top of this background shape, so I'll use the erase tool and just erase out the bit that I don't want over there. And then I can do opacity and adjust the opacity down a little bit like that. I don't want my shadow to look so awesome that people go, what an amazing shadow. I just want it to be there so that it looks like she's standing on something rather than floating around in space. As always, give it a go. Now with this image here that had a transparent overlay, what I did was I created the thing exactly the same as I had before, but I've cut her out and I've left the original underneath. So I've got two versions of that. I then went along to this wild shape and I just changed the blend mode. So that's over here where it says normal. You can go down and you can choose all sorts of different interesting blend modes. I used an overlay blend mode, and that gave me kind of a combination of this shape and the other one. I also put a gradient over the background, and I changed the blend mode of the gradient. Once again, you go up to normal and just go down and see what you get. I used the color mode in there to create these awesome colors in the background. Have a go with that. Let's go and get a donor image. I'm going to go and open up this one over here, which I have supplied for you if you want to use it, but find your own if you wish. This comes from Adobe stock, the free stock. So I'm going to open that one up. And what I want to do is I want to cut her out. So I'm going to go along to this little object selection tool. I'm going to go to select people and wait until it recognizes her. I can then click on her, make sure I'm getting the entire person, and then click apply. Now, I want to actually separate her from the background, but in a non-destructive way. So I'm going to get my layers up. If you can't find your layers, by the way, you go to the window menu and you find layers is halfway down the panel set. And I'm going to add a layer mask by clicking on this little button over here. So by doing that, I'll then mask out the background from her. So if you like to get that far, get your donor image, select the subject, and then go and add the little mask down there, and that will mask out your layer. Try it out. Let's make this wild circle to go round. I'm going to use the single column marquee tool, and I'm going to move across to her, and I'm going to put a single column over here somewhere. What I'm looking to do is kind of put it from her head down to maybe her middle over there. Now, I don't want to get this bit here or any of that in there, so I'm going to take a selection tool, the rectangular marquee tool, and I'm going to choose the subtract option over here. This is the little button, the third one along in there. And I'm going to click and drag to subtract that part of the marquee. And I'm going to go over here and say I don't want this bit either, like that. And in fact, I'm going to zoom in a bit further. And I also don't want that bit. So I don't want to get any green. I just want the skin tone going through up to her hair in there. Now, make sure, and this is so important, make sure that you are on the layer itself, not on the mask. So don't click on the mask, click on the layer, or this won't work. Click on the layer, copy and paste. That's Command C or Control C on the PC, so Command C on the Mac, and then Command V or Control V on the PC, and that will just paste in that little section over there. It's one little row of pixels. Let's zoom out a bit over here. Now, I'm going to go along and scale that up. So I'm going to zoom right out, and I'm going to go to Edit, Transform and Scale. Grab the middle, but hold down the Shift key. If you don't, it will just misscale. So hold down the Shift key, and you can then just scale this out horizontally. And I'm going to scale quite a lot, like that. And then click on my tick. So if I now move this around, you can see I've got a huge area in there to work from. Now, here's the making it round magic bit. We go along to filter, down to distort. This is a really old effect from, it's been around in Photoshop for years and years and years. Polar coordinates. Now, the polar coordinates, you can't see anything in there, but what I'm going to do is just scale out a little bit until I can see what I've done. I can't see it at all. Let's try polar rectangular, polar. Oh, well, I can't see it. Doesn't matter. I'll click OK. There it is in there anyway. Now, I'm just going to scale this to make it round. So I'm going to go once again to Edit, Transform, and down to Scale. And we're just going to make that round. Now, as you can see, by scaling it like this, all the points scale. Hold down the Shift key so that you can, what's in reality is actually misscaling it. And let's get a little circle like that. And then if I don't hold down the Shift key, I can then scale that up and down as well. So I'm looking for a little shape, something along that line over there that she's going to be jumping through. You could do whatever you want with this. I will zoom in a little bit over here because I'm going to make it a little bit larger. Something along that line. Maybe a bit smaller than that. Anyway, do try it out. I want to put a background in here, so I'm going to go to my foreground color down here, and I'm going to sample a color that I want to use. I'm going to choose her skin tone, click OK, and I'm going to go to the background color, and I'm going to choose maybe a darker version of her skin tone, something like that, click OK. Then down the bottom here, I'm going to go along to the adjustment layer button. I'm going to make a gradient. Now in the gradient, I'm going to click on the little drop down and choose from the basics the gradient with my foreground and background color in there. If you want to go and experiment with some of these other ones, you can just go along to them and choose all sorts of weird and wonderful gradients from those. But as I said, I'm going to be using ones from my image in there. Now, I'd like this to be a linear not a linear gradient, a radial gradient. If you want to move the gradient around, you can just click and drag. If you find that it doesn't, you can just untick a line with layer. And then we can go in and we can adjust the scaling of that as well to make it smaller or larger. Click OK. Now the gradient, I'm going to drag that below the other two layers. I'm going to have my person on top of the shape, and that's pretty much it. We're just now getting ready to actually start to erase some of her leg, so it looks like she's jumping through that shape. Have a go, get your circle in there, get your background in there, and then we'll move on to cutting her leg off. Now, how are we going to get rid of her leg? Well, we're going to add to the mask on her layer. But to do that, we're going to have to make a little selection over here. So I'm going to go to the shape layer. That's the circle that I've got here. I'm just going to hide that top layer. So I'm on layer 1, which is my circle. And I'm going to use a selection tool over here to just select that circular area in there. Now, I could try some of these tools. For example, the magnetic lasso tool. I could go and see if I could use the selection brush, or even go down to the object selection tool, and well, you can see it's not doing a great job there. But there's a little trick that we can use here to select a shape. If I go to this layer and I hold down now on a Mac it's Command, on a PC it's Control, and I click, what it will do is it will select any pixels which are on that layer. You can see if I hide that background, it's selected everything on that layer there. It's just a fast way of selecting something from a layer. Now I'm going to go back and switch on my dancer or jumper. I'm going to click on the mask. So I'm on the mask, not on the layer itself. That's really important. And we're going to take a paintbrush with black. You need to use black as your foreground color. And then we're just going to paint where the foot is. And you can see it almost looks like it's erasing it over there. In fact, all it's doing is by painting onto the mask, it's hiding that area there. Then you can go to select and deselect like that. Let's add a drop shadow to this layer. I'm going to go down over here to the FX, click over there and choose drop shadow. And I want to see this drop shadow, so I'm just going to change the opacity a little bit over there. You can change the size. And I'm going to change the distance because I want this drop shadow to kind of go down a little bit like that. So it's kind of coming just a little bit below her. Now I know it looks bad, but I'm going to click OK. So the problem with the drop shadow is that yes, it's getting on the shape very nicely, but it's also doing weird drop shadows here. And I don't want any drop shadow on this inner bit over here because that's supposed to be where she's jumping through. Likewise, I don't want a drop shadow from her foot. So I'm going to go to the layer menu. I'm going down to layer style. and I'm going to choose create layer, and that will take that drop shadow over there, make it into a new layer for me. Now I can actually take that layer and move it around anywhere. Let's get that back. So I think I will move it down just a little bit over there, so we kind of get some of the shadow hitting these areas there and that area there, looking very good. But then, very simply, I can take my erase tool where I don't want the shadow to be, and I can erase it out. So I'm still on the layer there. I don't want this shadow here, so I can erase that one. I don't want a shadow over here, because she's jumping through this area. I don't want the shadow on there. And in fact, I think the shadow from her hair and her head is just a little bit too harsh, so I will remove that as well, and maybe get rid of that shadow up there. So now we've got a shadow just on the, oh, I've seen a bit that I shouldn't have there, just on the circle to give her a little bit more depth. And you can change that. I can go to my opacity if it's too harsh and just reduce it a little bit as well. Lastly, I really don't like this gradient, and that's the great thing about these adjustment gradients, is that I can just go in there, double click it, and then I'm going to click on the gradient itself, somewhere on there. I can then choose my colors. So on this color here, I'm going to go to color. I think I'm going to choose a lighter version. And then for the darker color, I'm going to double click on that, and I'm going to find a different color in here, maybe one of those pinks in there. That's quite nice. Actually, it's looking okay. Click OK on that. If I want to move it around, I can still move that sort of center of the gradient around. I can change the scaling of the gradient if it's too big or too small. I think I'm reasonably happy with something like that. Click OK. On zooming in, I've noticed that there's some purple coming out behind her hair, which doesn't look so good. So there's a really cool trick that you can use to get rid of things like that in hair. I'm going to go to the mask on her layer. So I've clicked on the mask over here, not on the layer, but on the mask. And then I'm looking at the properties panel. And in the properties panel is something called select and mask. Now I'll click on select and mask. Now you might find that when you try this out, you have a white background or a black background. Doesn't really matter. All we're interested in here is scrolling down to the bottom and clicking on decontaminate colors. And you can see straight away when I switched on, those colors have disappeared in there. Now where it says output 2, I'm just going to say over here, a new layer with a layer mask. We'll click OK. So it's made a new layer for me over there. And if I switch on the other one, you can see the difference. That's the purple and that's without it. So I don't need that other layer. This one is now the one with the decontaminated colors. All I need to do now is to give it a save. So I've got my layered version saved. I'm then going to go to the cropping tool. I can then go into width, height and resolution, put in the size that I want for whichever social media platform I'm going to put this onto, or if it's going to be onto a document, I could put in, say for example, 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters at 300 pixels per inch. Put in whatever you want for your final result in there, and you can then go and export that out as a JPEG or a PNG file using File, Export, Export As, and choosing the format that you want in here. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Don't forget to try out variations on this. Try different contents, try it for the web, try it for printing, and show us your results. I love seeing what people are creating. Don't forget to check out my other Adobe courses. I also have courses in Affinity, Canva, and Procreate.